Hey everybody, Chris Pies here again. This is our final PCA sim racing classroom for the Series 10 races. So this is pretty exciting. We're at the final race. Got a little bit of a special treat for these last 2 weeks of races. It is Sebring in the Porsche RSR, the GTLM RSR. Should prove to be fun. It's the first time we've run this car in quite some time, and the first time in Series 10. So some little things we need to go over in terms of the car itself and some of its tendencies. And then we'll do, the typical track walk and talk about Sebring, especially at the pace of the RSR presents itself. A couple of things that I'm going to show and just touch base on. Remember that if you have any questions about the series whatsoever, I know we're at the end, make sure you go to our website, which is pcasimracing.com. You can see at the very top of the Series 10 webpage, you've got all the updates, which includes templates for the car if you're doing a custom livery for your car. We've also got the setup and the specifics on the conditions, so you can set up test drives, for instance, for practicing, and then also other information about this. The key note about this, something that has changed, is for this final race, it used to be that it was going to be a standing start. It is now going to be a rolling start in the RSR. So keep that in mind. We'll be rolling out of sunset and taking the green flag rather than from a standstill, which I think is a good thing for this particular car. So with that being said, let's talk about this fun little car that we call the RSR. So it's a little bit bittersweet. As you can see here, here's the car. Let me actually get it into something more fun. The RSR is a different beast from anything that we've been driving. So up to this point, we've been driving the Cup car, we've been driving the GT3R, and then we've been driving the GT4. The RSR is kind of like the pinnacle Super Porsche or Super 911 that Porsche made for a GT Le Mans. And so with that, it comes some really interesting features on it that are different from the typical gentleman race car that are the other GT cars that Porsche offers. So the RSR, despite being based on a 991 911, is very much different than that. It is in fact actually a mid-engine 911. So Porsche decided to go from the GT3R, which is a rear-engined, rear-drive car. For the RSR, they found a way to basically stick that engine inside the axles, and so this is actually a mid-engine car, so it's more akin to the Cayman than it is to the GT3R. So some of the characteristics that you get from the Cayman are transferable to this car. So the car tends to like to rotate around its center axis a lot more than, say, the GT3R or the Cup car. So you'll notice that if you drive this car, you'll find that it has really good turn-in, and it also has the ability to actually rotate really well. And particularly at Sebring, going through the hairpin in turn 7, you can really get that rotation and really get it done super well. The other things about this car is, I mean, it was designed to basically be the fastest GT car that existed at the time for the GT Le Mans series. So if you have watched Le Mans a few weeks ago or last weekend, or whatever it was, the GT cars that are in that series, the Porsches were RSRs. Now that they were the newer version, we have the older, I think this is the 2016 version, but they were this car. So this is the last season that GTLM basically is in existence. After this season, WEC and the FIA are switching over to GT3 cars like IMSA currently has, so the GT3R will be Porsche's offering in that class. But at least for the rest of this year, we still have GTLM and we still have the RSR competing. The characteristics of this car, beyond the platform differences of a GT3 car and the RSR, is that we have traction control in this car, like the other GT cars, but we do not have ABS. So you will lock these wheels up a lot like the Cup car if you brake too aggressively. You have tons of grip in this car. I mean, it's built for grip. You'll notice that the cornering speeds are just tremendous in this car. The turn-in is also tremendous in this car. But everything you learn from a GT4 and the Cup car and everything all transfers to this car as well. If you go in too fast into a corner, you're going to get understeer. If you're not smooth with the pedals, you're going to find the car really trying to fight you, and you're trying to control the back end from escaping and getting out of the way. But once you start getting to that comfort level with this car and the speeds that it offers, you'll find that it responds much quicker than its other Porsche brethren, other Porsche race cars. The car in general is more tightly sprung, which means it changes direction a lot quicker. It's just more responsive in general to inputs. So when we make an input, we need to be ready for it to react very quickly. Versus say like the Cup car or the GT4, where like you turn in and the car has to like lean over on its suspension and take a set before it actually does anything. In this car, it's more like an open wheel or a prototype car where you turn in and it instantly moves, and so it can be a little jarring at first. Other than that, I mean, the car sounds amazing. I was fortunate back before the pandemic in I guess it was 2020, very early 2020, like February. WEC came to COTA in Austin, and these cars were running in addition to the typical WEC fare, but specifically the customer cars were running the 2016 RSR, and the Porsche factory team was running the 2019 version, and the 2016s had that just absolute banshee wail and scream of a motor, and that's what we have in this car. The 2019s, I don't know what they did, if they bored it out or they got a different motor, but the engine note was a lot more baritone, a little bit more subdued to the ears. But the 2016 version, man, the thing just absolutely screams, and you can hear it in sim, which is pretty cool. Is there any questions on the car itself before we get to the car and track combo and do the track walk? All right, not hearing any. Cool. Just be aware that also another feature, depending on your cockpit and what you have, the screen on the car or the data is not an independent screen on the dashboard. It's on the steering wheel itself. So if you don't have your steering wheel visually enabled in the options, you don't have like a physical dash on your rig, you're not going to have any information. So just make sure that you've got and you realize that the screen is on the wheel and not on the dash like the GT3R. Okay, so let's talk about Sebring in the RSR. Should be fun. So give me 1 second. Let's get the party started. So let me get a good camera angle for us. The thing to remember about Sebring is that you always hear about the bumps and everything, which is very true. It's very important to make sure that you are cognizant that the car is going to move around a lot at Sebring. But we're running fixed setups. There's not a whole lot we can do to fix the bumps or change dampers to kind of make the car more compliant over bumps. The car is what it is. So we need to make sure that when we're driving this car around Sebring, we realize where the bumps are, things to avoid, things not to avoid. But in general, I don't find Sebring, other than the last corner, being too particularly bumpy or something that's just completely out of the ordinary. But yes, Sunset has definitely got some bumps that we'll talk about when we get to there finally. Other things about Sebring, it's flat. There is not a hill in sight here. There is no undulation whatsoever. Everything is 100% flat, which does a couple of things. One, it kind of hampers our vision in the sense that we can't really see very well through corners because everything is on the same plane. So we have to really, really focus on looking ahead, looking through the corner, looking to track out when we're about to turn in, looking where we want the car to go and not just right in front of our car. It's very, very easy at tracks that are just completely flat to get stuck to be looking 2 feet out in front of your car, like right off the hood, instead of looking through the corner. So stay disciplined, keep your eyes up, look through corners as best as you can. The curbs tend to be the highest points on the track here. So you can easily see the apexes, and then you can also see track out when there's curbing and such. But do your best to try to find markers, even if that means looking out beyond the track, outside track limits, outside the walls at buildings or structures, to help keep your eyes up and look for far down the road. That'll help your ability to anticipate problems from wrecking cars in front of you, and also it'll help you make sure you're driving around the track and looking where you want the car to go, rather as opposed to watching out and getting that target fixation and driving the car into a problem. So here we go, coming out onto the straightaway here at Sebring. The straight at Sebring is a nice long one. really good opportunity to get a good run on opponents coming out of sunset if you do really well coming through there. The big thing we need to make sure is when we come up into turn one, we're preparing ourselves properly. So much like any turn, we're going to be all the way track right, setting up for a big sweeper of a turn that's left. Again, completely flat through here. There's no camber that is helping us. We're on the old airfield part of Sebring, so there can be some bumps that can unsettle the car. We just need to be aware that that can happen. But we need to make sure that we're thinking the proper way through this corner. It is a very long corner. We cannot see the end of the corner due to the inside wall, so it's difficult to look through the corner and look where you want the car to go. Our vision is very limited here, which can make this turn a little bit daunting. So for the brake zone, we've got this bridge that's above us, which is a really good indication of, hey, we're about to brake soon. We're not braking at the bridge. We're going to brake after the bridge. But as we're coming down, if you look at the wall, this concrete wall, you'll notice it kind of snakes in and then it snakes out. And then there's like this little indentation right here where my mouse cursor is. That's kind of or at least for me, that's where my braking marker is. I want to brake just before this little indentation in the wall before it goes to the left. And I want to brake as close as I can to that wall. So as you can see here, I'm all the way against the wall. I'm braking just before the little indentation. But we don't want to be looking here for very long. We just want to use our peripheral vision to see us coming up to that. We want to be looking over here to the left side. We want to be looking at where we want the car to go. And so what we're looking for is through this corner is we're going to turn in at about this indentation. And what we're doing is we're looking for a cone that you can see just over here on the edge. We're looking for this cone, and that cone, we want to drive our car underneath the cone with our left side wheels inside of this yellow line, but obviously not touching the wall. So left side of the car is going to be inside the line. We're going to apex the corner under the cone, and if we can get our car to basically apex at that exact point, we can be confident that if we're full throttle, we'll make the corner. So what I mean is if we come through here, we're turning in, and again, we want our apex point to be, boom, right here underneath this cone. The closer to the wall that we can get, the better. So I try to always put my left side tires inside the yellow line as an indication of me doing the turn pretty well. Again, apexing under the cone. If we apex it right there at the cone, then we can be 100% throttle going through this corner and be confident that the car will make it on exit on that consistent arc. If we have enough speed, it'll be close. We'll put our right side tires all and use all this little bit of runoff curbing as we can. But I've yet to come to a situation where if I properly apex underneath the cone, that I've run wide on the exit. If you come to this point at the cone and you are apexing, say here before the cone, you're going to have a bad time on the exit of the corner because you're going to have been too early at the apex, and you're probably going to end up either having to come out of the throttle to avoid going wide on exit. If you apex after the cone, that's safe and that's fine, but you're leaving some speed on the table because you had to sacrifice speed at the entry in order to try to do this very, very late apex. And you'll find yourself probably about mid-track coming out of the corner, and you'll have left multiple car widths to the right side of your car that if you apexed at the cone, you could have carried more speed and ended up all the way on track out. So again, to summarize, turn one is brake just before the little kink in the wall, turn in just after the kink, eyes up, look for the cone, apex underneath the cone. When you realize the car is going to be there, you can boom, back full throttle, and just ride the throttle all the way out to track exit. It's an incredibly fast corner. Be careful at the race start where it's very easy to be 2-3 wide through this because there's so much room through turn one. Just understand that in general, the cars on the inside tend to have a better time than the cars on the outside because it's very rare that we ever drive on the outside of this corner when we're practicing. So if you've got a car or two inside of you and you're stuck on the outside, it's very easy to kind of get lost out here figuring out where you need to be, which means that you tend not to go very fast and the cars inside have the advantage and will kind of blow by you. So just keep that in mind on turn one at the start of the race. All right, after turn one, we've got a little tiny chute coming down into that's turn two, technically, this little kink. So we're coming into turn three. We've got some really nice cones that are set up here. we can use as brake markers, but don't depend on them. I'd rather use the lines than the cones, because if somebody runs wide here and gets them, they can take out these cones and then your brake marker is gone. So use them if they're there, but don't be dependent on them. We've got the lines here that also help. I find that basically when I'm in my groove, I'm braking right at the 3 cone in the first line here, and I'm going to downshift all the way to second gear. So bang through the gears, and I always feel like I'm turning early for this corner. I'm treating it in my mind. I'm treating it like a bit of a carousel, and what I mean by that is I'm trying to get down to the curbing as early as possible and ride the curbing around in contrast to like a single solitary apex point. So I'm turning in what feels like early, but it tends not to be. And in reality, I end up doing a super late apex, but that's just kind of the nature of the corner. I think it's a decreasing radius corner. So as you turn in, it's nice and wide, and then it gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And then the apex point is way around the corner, as you can see, way right here where it's the tightest. That's our apex point coming through here. Again, second gear, the big key here is when we turn into this corner, we need to be getting off the brakes as soon as possible. The tendency is to ride the brake too long and trail brake too long into this corner. When we do that, what ends up happening is the car tends to understeer a little bit because we're asking the front tires to turn and brake. So what I've noticed is, especially in this car, when you're braking, get all your braking done kind of in a straight line. You can do a little bit of trail braking, but try to get off that brake as smoothly but quickly as possible. And when you do that, one, you carry speed through the entry of the corner, but you're also allowing those front tires to turn and use all of their grip for lateral grip as opposed to braking and turning. So off the brakes as I am here, just a tiny little bit to try to keep a little bit of weight on the nose to help with the turn in, but very, very little, minimal. And then once I realize that I'm going to make the corner and apex way back here on the back side of the corner, start picking up the throttle in second gear. When we come through turn 3, the tendency is to pinch it off because, oh, we got a right-hander. But in reality, this right-hander is kind of the throwaway corner. The left-hander here is, we can almost take it relatively quickly. I don't want to be all the way track right because that really makes the turn 4 kind of awkward. But at the same time, I don't need to pinch this left-hander off to the extreme to set up for the right-hander, because this right-hander doesn't do anything. It doesn't lead to a straightaway. It doesn't do anything. We're immediately slowing down for the most important corner in this segment, which is turn 5. So you'll see that when I come through turn 3, I'm using a pretty decent amount of track. And then if we use a lot of the track, we can actually attack this curbing pretty heavily with our right side tires and even go up across the grass here to try to open the corner if necessary. And if we do it right, we'll end up about mid to right track to set up for turn 5. And what I mean by that is, you'll notice how I've got the car set up where I want to, which is 2/3 of the track, 2/3 right of track, to set up for this relatively long left-hand sweeping kind of carousel. We don't need to be all the way here against the grass, and we don't actually even need to be where my car is right now. The further right we can get it, great, but we don't want to sacrifice speed and drive the car to the right side of the track at the expense of momentum. So what I mean by that is, if we come through here and we end up with the car, let's say mid-track right here, because we carried a lot of speed through the right-hander, you don't want to stand on the brakes to slow the car up to try to drive it over to the right to turn to the left. You're just adding distance on this corner. Wherever the car kind of ends up through turn 3, that's where you end up for your entry into turn 4, for better or worse. Again, second gear, we're going to do a nice little break on the way in, and this corner never seems to end. It seems to just take forever to finally get down to apex. It's a super late apex. The tendency for a lot of people is to apex it early just because it doesn't end. And if we apex it early, we run risk of running wide on the exit. If you run wide on the exit of turn 5, odds are you apexed early on turn 4. And that's why you ended up out in the dirt. And it's not a friendly place to be. So the apex point is, I try to look, if you're getting really granular, if you're looking at this stripe here and this curbing, there's one that's a little bit tighter, and it's actually this point right here where my mouse is. That's the apex point. So we want to try to get our car with the left side tires as close as we can. On this particular lap, I didn't. It is where my apex is. It's the closest point that I am to the inside of the curve is right here at this point. But I could have gotten the car a little bit closer to the inside, which would have made the corner a little wider, which would have helped me allow me to carry a little bit more speed. But the goal here through this corner is the sooner we can get to full throttle, the better, so long as we make the corner. We don't want to get on the throttle too soon and run wide. That defeats the purpose. But the focus here is get the car rotated, get the car turned in, and get it in a good angle to where we can add throttle and accelerate coming out of this corner, because it leads on to a quite significant straightaway coming out. On the exit, just be aware that this curbing, there is a little bit of a bump on the curbing here, and then it just completely bottoms out, and this last part of the curbing is completely flat. So if you do get up on the curbing, it will fall off here, and if you're not ready for it, it's very easy to get the car unsettled, especially if it starts to nibble the dirt. And if it does that, you can easily loop it there. So just make sure that if you get up on the curbing, your steering wheel is pretty much dead straight, so you don't run risk of losing traction and spinning the car. All right, that's pretty much the first sector of Sebring. Anybody have any questions through there? All right, you guys can still hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, I do have a question. When I'm accelerating coming out of there, the back end tends to start pushing out to the left, so I'm oversteering to the right, and then I correct back and get the pendulum swing. So I think it's just the fact that I'm getting on the gas too early.
So you'll notice in this car, and that's what I had mentioned before when we first were talking about the car in general, is that because it's mid-engined, when you get on throttle and the way the car is designed, you actually will get a little bit more rotation, not just straight understeer. And so you can use that to your advantage, like coming through corners like this. Of when you get on the throttle, the back end is going to rotate a little bit more. And so when it starts to do that, you got to be ready for it with a little bit of countersteer, or you got to be smoother with your throttle. But if you're coming through here and you have to countersteer, just understand that once that happens, you're now steering to the right side, and the car is going to start moving out to the right as a result of you doing that, because you're drifting the car at that point. And we had talked before, Steve, about getting that slip angle in the car to help you turn around corners. If you're finding yourself getting that situation where you're counter steering just a little bit coming through that corner, you're doing it right. The fast way through here is right on the edge of grip, where your steering wheel is almost straight, but the car is still turning to the left, and that means you have like a little bit of a four-wheel drift, a little bit of a slip angle coming through here, and that's the fast way through there. But how you manage it is what separates the really fast guys from the just fast guys.
So a little slower on the throttle, or a little later.
Little slower on throttle, or a little later. But you can actually see if I come through here, look at my steering wheel and what I'm doing here on the entry. So let's go all the way back to where I'm just about to turn in. So I'm turning in here. So you can see my steering wheel. I've turned in. I've started adding throttle, and you'll notice countersteer. I'm right on the edge of grip on the way through. I'm managing that slip angle with the steering wheel. So I've got a little bit of countersteer in there to manage the slip angle through there.
Cool, thanks.
Yep. All right, coming sailing down into the hairpin or hotel or turn 7, however you want to call it. We've got a really good opportunity to pass, but also a really good opportunity to have a problem if you try to make a pass. This is a place where it's very tempting to dive bomb somebody or get dove bombed, if that's the way you say it. A lot of times people will say super tight corner coming in, really good opportunity for me to try to outbrake someone. Yes, but two cars going through this side by side are incredibly slower than one car going through it properly. So if you try to make a pass at the apex of this corner, you are giving time for the rest of the field. Now, that may be calculated. You may be fighting for the lead, so it doesn't matter, or whatever. But also understand that if you pop out to do a big, heavy break and outbrake someone, all the cars up until this point, and later on in the race, it gets worse and worse. All the cars are braking pretty much on a straight line on the left side of the track. If you pop out to brake in from the middle of the track down to the apex point, first, you're going to have to slow the car more because you're not taking a wider angle into the corner, so you can't carry as much speed. And two, that is going to be a marbled part of the track, which means there's going to be less grip offline in the braking zone. So theoretically, the car that's on the inside will have to brake earlier than the car that's online and taking the corner properly. What ends up happening usually is the car that tries to make the pass and comes to the middle of the track and tries to outbrake the car that's online, tries to brake at their normal point, and they end up sailing through the corner because of less grip on the corner. You know, they're trying to outbrake their opponent, all sorts of factors. But what ultimately results is the inside car going too wide. Where that becomes a problem is if you're the car that's on the proper racing line and the guy's trying to outbrake you on the inside, if you turn in, normally you get to your point where, and you guys are neck and neck on the brake zone, and you have to turn into the corner like you normally would, but he's taking it too hot, guess what happens? You're starting to turn in, but he can't turn in because he's going too fast, and he ends up hitting you, right? The inside car would be 100% at fault, but you guys are wrecked, and so it doesn't matter who's at fault, frankly, because both of you have damaged cars. So a lot of times what ends up happening, especially if it's early in the race, what I'll do, if somebody tries to make a move that they're going to try to outbrake me and they get alongside me coming into the brake zone, what I will do is I will actually lift a little early and let them try to outbrake me, even though I'm not going to even put up a chance. Let them run through the corner, and then as they go through, take my normal line back behind them and undercut them, do the over-under. So keep that in mind when you're coming in down, screaming into this corner. If somebody tries to take it too wide, usually the car on the outside is the one that ends up losing the most should a problem happen. Now, that being said, let's talk about how to properly take this corner. So coming into this corner, we've got, again, really good brake markers with the cones, but don't depend on them because they may get taken out. But we also have lines on the track that are in line with the cone. So my brake zone or my brake point on this is the first set of cones in this car. And it is a threshold braking. I mean, it is boom, 100 or 10% brake pedal. Obviously, well, maybe not 10%. 10% would be full emergency stop, lighting up or locking the brakes. But brake all the way to the threshold of lockup. We need to slow this car down for this corner. So it is boom, hit that brake marker, but hit the brakes firmly. Something else I didn't mention about at the beginning, this car is different from the other GT cars in that it actually has aerodynamics that are assisting it. So more aero than a GT3R or a GT3 car, which means that the car at higher speed is being pushed into the tarmac, adding grip to the car. So the most grip that this car has is when it's going the fastest. So when you are right here at this point, this is the point when you're going the fastest down this straightaway, meaning that you can put the most brake pressure into the car when you first start braking. So it makes sense that your initial brake pedal is boom, pretty quick to threshold braking because that's where you have the most grip. As the car starts to slow down, the aero running over the car is becoming less and less. There's less speed, there's less air traveling over the wings, which means it's not pushing the car into the ground as much. So as the car starts to decelerate and go slower, you're losing the benefit of the aerodynamics of the wind going across the wings, which means the car isn't being pushed into the ground as much, which means we don't have as much grip. So if we maintain that brake pedal perfectly at the threshold that we would hit it at 160 miles an hour, when we get down to like 60 miles an hour, all of a sudden the wheels are actually going to start to lock because they don't have as much grip as they did at the higher speed. So it's very important to effectively brake in this car is when you're going the fastest, that's when you're going to hit the brakes the hardest. And then as you start to slow down, you start to release the brake like a trail brake as the car starts to slow down more and more. That's how you have to try to brake in this car to be able to be effective. So
First question.
Yeah.
On cold tires, how much further back do you have to start braking?
Not too terribly much. It depends on how aggressive you are. If it's cold tires and this is the first time I'm going through this, I may start braking probably around here, maybe a car length ahead, and just start feeding on the brakes a little bit lighter just to make sure I don't lock up. Because if you lock up, it's pretty much game over. You're going to go through the corner. So we want to get as close as we can to the edge of the cliff that is lockup without going over the cliff. So depending on your comfort level, depends on how close you can get to that cliff without going over. So usually on lap one, just try to play it easy. You've probably got a bunch of traffic around you anyway, so you don't want to be threshold braking on the rear bumper of the car in front of you in case they brake too early or something you not expect. So what I typically do on lap one going into this corner and I'm in a pack of cars, I tend to lift a little bit early and let the car slow down a little bit and then basically gauge my braking a little bit about the cars around me so I don't roll into anybody. But after lap one, you can take your normal braking point. But great question. So as you can see here, brake, boom. I'm like 90%, 90% brake pedal. I mean, I'm pushing these pedals pretty hard without locking up. And then you'll notice as I start to slow down, I start to slowly come off it. So I'm at like 80% pedal at this point. And then you can see at this point, at the next set, I'm probably at maybe a 75% pedal. And then at this point, I'm maybe at a 50% pedal. And then now I'm trail braking into the corner, so I'm coming off it much quicker. But you can see just in the straight line where I need to slow this car, I'm slowly coming out of the pedal, and that's because I'm losing aerodynamic benefit as the car is slowing down. For this particular corner, what you want to do is you want to shift down all the way to first gear. A little bit of trail brake to keep the nose in it, but not too much, because I've found that if you keep too much brake pedal on your entry, the car just understeers. And it's just really difficult to get it turned in. I'd much rather you see it slow the car down, and then when you start your turn in, you're pretty much off the brakes to allow those front tires to give all their grip in lateral grip. So we turn in, we apex pretty much right at the middle of this corner. One guy told me once in real life, when you do the turn for the hairpin at Sebring, it's like this: you're braking in a straight line, and then you do this, and then you straighten out again, and that's all it is. Brake, turn in, release, straight again. Very similar, and it actually works really well. So straight wheel, turn in, cross our arms, boom, for the midpoint, hit the midpoint, unwind, and accelerate through. Obviously, if we have a ton of steering in the car right here, we can't get on full throttle because the tires won't let us. We'll just be in traction control or we'll spin the car. So it's a very gradual adding of throttle until we get the car straightened out to when we can go to full throttle. You can get on full throttle pretty quickly because when you come out of the corner, you're unwinding your hands pretty quickly. But we don't want to get on it too early and cause an oversteer situation coming out of it. We want to maintain grip in the car and stay out of traction control. All right, coming through the Fangio S's, flat out, no real concern here, even though they are technically turns. We just want to make sure that when we go through them, we're setting ourselves up for the next turn, which would be turn 10. I want to say it's 10. This is a fun corner, but it does have some peculiarities. So the brake marker is going to, once we've got the tire and the car up to temp, it's going to be after the 4 cone. So just before the 3 cone is what I'm using. So right between the two. Again, pretty much a threshold brake situation on initial pedal. And then we're immediately bleeding off the pedal as the car starts to slow down. And then the goal here is, my thought process coming into this corner, both in sim and in real life, is I want to get off the brakes as soon as possible. And what I mean by that is I basically turn the car in with a little bit of trail brake and then immediately off the brakes. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to roll the speed through the corner. And the only way you do that is by not touching the brake pedal. And we want to do a late apex on this first right-hander. And we want to basically situate the car in such a way that we're coming out about just past mid-track through this first right-hander. It's a lot quicker than you think it is. So as you can see here, I'm bleeding off the brakes. I've turned in, and then you'll notice I'm pretty much off the pedal at this point. I've got a little bit of trail braking in, but I mean, this is close as makes no difference off the pedal. Super late apex, so I'm like 2/3 of the way through the corner. And now I've already started adding throttle. I'm in first gear through here. Second gear can also work. I've been kind of playing around with each one. I can't decide which one I like better. But I usually end up in first gear. And then we can actually end up all the way over here on the left side of the track if we need to. because we carried speed through the first part of the corner, because this car has so much lateral grip that you can be 100% flat throttle through these left-handers, even from this spot on the track. So it doesn't really matter where you end up through here. When I'm driving in race situations, I'm trying to end up right here. So maybe just beyond half track to make it a little easier to get around the first one. But at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily matter. The other thing to note about this corner is it's one of the few corners with camber, and it's hurting you. It's actually falling away from you at apex. So it's really easy to get the car unsettled coming through here and have understeer on entry. And then if you get on throttle too soon and too harshly, to be fighting oversteer on the way out because of the lack of grip. So yeah, I find that when I go through this corner, if I'm on any of the pedals when I turn in and when I'm on my entry, the car just doesn't really like it. As soon as I get off the pedals and let the tires do their work, the car just kind of grips up and takes the angle that I want it to. So thought process here is to think off the pedals, carry my momentum, drive it like a Miata, maintain my speed going through this corner, and it tends to help a little bit better. All right, coming through, these left-handers after this corner are 100% flat. No problem at this car taking them flat. And then when I enter into tower, I tend to enter tower from a shallow angle. Some people take it and bring the car over all the way to the left side to try to create a straighter line for the braking zone over here along the left side. I kind of just view it as, if I don't need to travel this extra distance to get the car to the left, then why should I? So my brake zone tends to be a little bit diagonal across the track. And I tend to set up tower a little bit like a big arc as opposed to just kind of a 90-degree angle. But there's a lot of different ways to set up the entry to tower. So this is just my way. So I tend to be over here near the curb. Once I cross over the curb, I try to point the car basically at this last cone / curbing. And then once I clear that curb and I've kind of got the car straight again, then I'll get on the brakes. Not too strong a brake, probably maybe a 7 pedal on entry. Let the car get all the way over towards and nibble the curb. And then once I nibble the curb, then I can take a turn in for tower itself. This is, again, one of the few corners that actually has camber on the track, and the camber is helping us right at apex. So we want to get down to as close to the curbing as possible to take advantage of that camber without getting on the curbing, because the curbing is very, very high. So don't touch the curb, but get as close as you can to it. Second gear, you'll notice, as you can see right there, right is actually a perfect place to pause. The car takes this extra little bit of right there, and that's the camber in the bowl in the track right there at apex that allows the car just to take a little bit more of a tuck and allow you to kind of accelerate through the corner as opposed to kind of just gliding through the corner. So you can actually see here, I'm off all the pedals like I tend to be on entry around here. So not touching any pedals, frankly. And then right, boom, here, I've already started to add throttle. And in fact, right at apex, I'm at 100% throttle. So I'm going through the corner and accelerating at this point. Because I know that bowl and that camber is going to help me come through the corner. Second gear, nice and easy. Make sure we maintain a nice smooth steering wheel through there. We don't want to have too much steering angle when we go to full throttle because we can get oversteer if that happens. All right, any questions from basically the hairpin through tower before we...
Yeah, the curbs on the inside are kind of big, and I noticed you didn't take any of them, didn't even nudge them. Is that on purpose?
Yeah, you don't want to touch this. I mean, you can nibble it, but you don't want to be going over this curb. What tends to happen if you nibble this curb or you go over this curb, it tends to bounce the car, or it will bounce the car, and you just tend to end up bouncing out. So what advantage you gain by cutting the corner a little bit is negated by the fact that the car just tends to bounce out to the left, and you end up in a very similar spot. And you have to delay your throttle because the car is in the air, right? You have to wait till the car lands and settles before you get on the throttle. If you don't touch the curb, you can get on throttle right here. Whereas if you were on the curb, you'd have to wait till about here before you could add the throttle. So don't touch this curb is kind of the rule of thumb. Get close to it. Don't touch it. That's a tasty Manhattan. if I do say so myself. All right, continuing on. Coming through the double left-hander here, 100% flat. No issue in this car. Some cars, it's sketchy. This car has no problem. It has so much grip. So just 100% flat. We want to be careful with this curve. You don't want to really get up on it. There's no need to, frankly. But it is a pretty big bump if you get up on it, which could really unsettle the car. Just apex it normally right here like we would normally do. And it's no drama whatsoever. No stress in the car. The whole point of this double left-hander is to position the car so we're going over the curb on this last left-hander. And the whole point of that is we want to set the car up as far left as possible to set up for the coming up right-hander entering into Le Mans. So come over here, keep the car as far left as we can, and then we're going to brake at the beginning just after the curbing, but pretty much at the cones. Again, don't rely on the cones, but you can use them if they're definitely here. So the brake marker is at the 3 cone, effectively. Pretty firm brake pedal, but it's just like for a moment. So I'd say go to 9 pedal and then immediately start pulling and bleeding off of it as soon as you get to it. And then the goal here is through all these next set of corners, they're kind of like these big carousel corners. We're going to get down to the apex curbing and we're going to kind of ride it a little bit. Same thing on the left-hander, and then the same thing on the right-hander coming out and leading on to the straightaway. So I've turned in pretty much right at just before the last cone that's sitting here. We want to get down to the curbing and ride around it. As you can see, apex on the inside of the curbing as best as possible. You can actually drop your tires inside this curbing if you're feeling frisky. But just understand that if you drop it, there is a drop, so you'll feel it in the car. And then when you come back over the curb, it's going to have a significant bump. Just be ready for it. I try not to do that just because I don't like cars bouncing around on me if I can avoid it. So I'll get as close as I can while keeping my wheels on the curbing. Second gear, third gear, I don't think it really matters. I've been messing with third gear more and liking that better because I tend to keep my momentum up. So I tend to like to leave it in third gear. Coming out, we'll use all the track on the way out to set up for the left-hander because this car has so much grip. We don't need to be mid-track. We can be all the way left and still make this left-hander. Similar, we'll ride the curbing around a little bit. And then we're going to keep the car moving left after the curbing to try to open up this last right-hander. Now, this last right-hander is the only corner, frankly, out of this series that matters because it leads onto the big back straightaway, onto the runway. So we'll come out here a little bit to try to open up the entry as much as possible, but we don't want to like drive all the way out here to open it because we're traveling too far. We're traveling additional distance that we don't need to. So it's like driving the car another 100 feet that we don't have to drive, which is going to lose us time. So kind of the sweet spot is just as we maintain that left-hand arc through this corner, we just kind of maintain it for a little bit more after the corner to end up there. And then basically as soon as the corner ends and we're about to get on the brake, that's when we straighten the car up and start turning it down to the inside. We'll downshift into second gear, use all the curbing, and even get our right side tires inside the curbing. So long as our left side tires are left of the yellow line, we're fine. If we get our left side tires over the yellow line, that's where the slowdown starts to happen. So make sure you keep your left side tires on the track, left of the yellow line. So this is okay. I tend not to put my right side tires right of the curbing just because I don't like to flirt that close with the slowdown. And because that slowdown is killer. So I tend to basically keep my right side tires much like the right-hander before on the curbing and apex the inside of the curbing as best I can. But on this particular lap, I did do it the way is technically optimal. And the goal is basically let the car run wide. Oh my goodness, I got a 1x there. Okay, so this was a bad lap. You're not supposed to do that. So when you come through here, we want to apex it here, but we want to apex a little bit later than I did. And the reason I went out into the dirt out here is because I apexed too early. So a little bit of a later apex. Use all this exit curbing as much as possible to avoid having to do this. If you do what I did here, just straighten your hands out, which is exactly what I do here. So you can see as soon as I get into that dirt, the car just straightens out, just boom, straights. Even though I have got steering angle in the car, we can just ride it. So as soon as it starts to straighten out, we straighten our hands take it straight. We don't want to fight the car from what it wants to do. The tendency is to keep too much steering in, and then all of a sudden we grip up and we snap it to the right into the wall. Just keep our momentum up through the dirt. We're pretty much going straight anyway, and then bring it on nice and safely on the exit. Wow, I did that lap time. I did a 56.2 with that mess. All right. Okay, so screaming down the back straight. Really good opportunity to pass people like me that put 2 in the dirt. But we're setting up for sunset. Again, we've got really good brake markers with the cones. My cone marker and my brake marker is the 2 cone here. That's where I am going to basically tuck this car in. And what I'm trying to do with sunset is I'm trying to create as straight a line as possible for the brake zone. Now, it's not going to be perfectly straight, but I want to try to brake in a straight line. A car braking in a straight line can brake up more effectively than if it's turning. So as little steering angle as I possibly can have means that I can slow the car down safely for the turn, for the entry. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically turning it in, and then as soon as I turn in, I'm going to start braking. So I haven't actually touched the brakes yet. And I'm trying to draw a straight line from this point through this little first apex point with the little hut here, and a straight line into the entry of this first corner. So you can actually see how I'm straightening the car up pretty significantly. And then I'm basically taking a nice wide entry into this corner. This is like a triple apex corner. My next apex point is right here before the bridge where this wall is. It's about a car and a half displaced off of it. So right there. And then my last apex point is basically over here with the grass in the track. Right there. Again, displaced slightly. If we do it right, our car will end up all the way out here close to the wall, and we'll have a good run all the way down the straightaway. Now, that's the way I did it on this particular lap. If I'm in a race scenario, I tend to take a little bit of a different line. I tend to take it even more aggressively inside, so I tend to pinch it more. And what I try to do is I try to create as short a distance as possible. So I tend to have the car down here where my cursor is, and then I try to turn it in and keep it nice and tight. It's a little slower. Your speed is not nearly as fast as this wide arc on entry, but you're also traveling significantly less distance. And you're protecting the inside from attack from potential people that are trying to pass you. So again, if I'm in a hot lap, I may end up being out here to try to keep momentum and keep my speed, to keep good speed going onto the front straight. If I'm in a race conditions or something like that, I tend to take a little bit of a shallower line. And then every permutation in between those two is a viable option. The big goal here on this corner is to put your car in a situation where you're apexing here at the first apex here, or the second technically, and then your third apex here. And the sooner we can get on the full throttle and hold it, the better result we're going to have coming out of the corner. So you can actually see right here, I start feeding on throttle right here, well before this first apex. And then basically before I even get to this apex point, I'm full throttle and I am riding it all the way around the corner. There tends to be a very ugly bump really close to this wall right here. And then there's also another bump somewhere right around here that's tight. That's why I displace it by about a car width and a half from these two apex points. But just be aware that if you do come in here really, really tight, there are some significant bumps right here. Similar out here, if you take it too wide, you can really find yourself bouncing around a lot. There's kind of a sweet spot somewhere around in this area where the bumps aren't that bad. But even I, coming through here probably 2 times out of 5, actually end up in a good spot where I want to be. Most of the time I end up hitting the bumps wrong, and the car tends to bounce around a little bit. So just be ready for it. Just to show you what this corner looks like a little bit more, let's do the chase cam and do this typical whoop, so you can see how crazy this corner looks. and get a better vision of it. So you can see on entry, I can't see my cursor when I have it hidden, so just you'll have to take my word for it. But if we look at the entry point where the flag stand is coming off the main runway, you can see how wide the entry is. Like, it's really not that much of a corner. It's relatively straight in this first part of this corner. And then you can see when you get to the bridge area, that's where the actual corner is. And it's significantly tighter right there at that entry. You don't really feel like that. It doesn't feel like that at speed because you're going like 160 miles an hour entering this corner. So it feels like a kind of constant radius corner. But the reality is it actually tightens up pretty significantly in the second third of the corner. So we have to make sure that we're using that first part of this corner that is relatively straight as our braking zone to slow the car down, and then setting up for this double right-hander apex on the second part of the corner around the bridge area. So that's the kind of the goal that we get through here. So if I rewind it, I know the camera is going to kind of move around. I apologize if that's a little nauseating, but it's best I got. So as we come through here, you can see wide. Actually, I could probably do this. Hold on, let's see if I can do this. Static. Will that work? No, that didn't work. All right. Anyway, so wide entry coming through here. Tuck it in. Bring it in nice and tight. Apex 1 here. And then Apex 2 here. And a good run coming out. All right. Any questions through that?
Yeah, hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, what gear are you going through? Are you holding in third, going down to second?
So I tend to hold third when I'm in my rhythm. But if I'm really like kind of winding it out and trying to set a lap time, I may go to second here, depending on how the car feels. But again, I don't think there's an advantage one way or the other. I haven't seen my lap times change in any significant way being third. Third tends to allow me to keep my momentum and keep my miles an hour up. Second tends to get a little bit of a squirt coming out of the corner, but I tend to lose a mile an hour or two going down into second. So I lose my momentum. So it's kind of like a wash either way. And it depends on your line. If you're taking a really wide line, you probably get third better. If you're taking a really tight line, second might be better because you're going to have a lower min speed.
Gotcha.
But great question. Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right, let's do a cockpit view so you can see what it's like at speed. All right, here we go. So coming into turn 1, we're looking for that little kink in the wall that I had mentioned before. We're going to brake just before it, turn in at it. We're looking for the cone and the fence. There it is. Fourth gear, back full throttle, ride it all the way around. Looking for the first set of cones, so they are. Brake, off the brakes early, turn in. Back on throttle, cut the corner, late apex. There it is, back on throttle, catch the oversteer on the way out. Run down to the hotel, we're going to look for the bridge and we're going to look for the first set of cones. That's our brake zone. Threshold brake right there, but bleed off the brake, brake, bleed off, bleed off, bleed off, bleed off. Down to first gear, cross our hands, straighten them up, back on throttle when the car's straight. Run all the way up through the gears. We're going to look for that second cone. So I think it's the 3 cone. Brake just before it. Boom. Down to second gear. Down to first. Off the brakes. Back on throttle. Full throttle and ride a nice wide arc around the double left-hander. Brake in a straight line at tower. Down to second gear. Turn in. Don't touch the curb. Back on throttle early. Ride the oversteer on the way out. Double left-hander. Don't touch the first curb. Get all over the second curb to cut the corner. Brake at the 3 cone. Get down to the curbing, ride it around. Same thing on the left. Down to second gear. And don't apex it early and run wide. If you do, straighten your hands out. Just kind of dirt track it through. Coming down to sunset, we're going to brake at the 2 cone. Nice straight line as best as we can. 2 cone, brake in a straight line. Minimal steering angle, off the brake, back on throttle 100%, double apex it, let the car run out where it needs to run out, and that's a lap of Sebring. Any questions? It's a fun track, fun car. It's a fast car. So if you're used to driving GT4s and GT3Rs, you jump into this thing, the sound, the visceralness of it, and the speed in general, it can be a bit of intimidating. Just take your time with it. Don't try to eat the whole elephant in one bite. Take little segments if best as possible. Drive it at 90% if you've never driven this car at Sebring. Drive it at 90%, then slowly start to build up your speed and build up your speed. Try to go 100% speed right out of the gate. It's very, very easy to get frustrated and get discouraged. So keep it on the track, keep it rolling forward, and build the speed once you have the confidence to do so. Other than that, I mean, Sebring's a fantastic track. It's one of my favorites. This car is great too. They've made a lot of improvements over the years in terms of the tire model, and this last race for the series should prove to be pretty fun in my opinion. So as always, after this classroom, there's a varying amount of EDE sessions that are going up. Some of them are going to be chock full of race starts, so they'll do multiple race starts if you want to practice that. There will be one that our group's putting on, the central group, that tends to be more of a mock race, so we'll have the full qualifying, open qualifying, and the hour-long race. For those of you that are outside the challenge class, I encourage you guys to jump in one of them, practice it, and see what you got. If you have any questions whatsoever about anything that either I talked about today or as your practice for the upcoming races, they come up in your head, just send me a quick note on Discord. I'll try to answer it as best I can. Or if you want me to take a look at any data, I'm always happy. Myself or anybody with a mod tag, frankly, here in Discord, we're happy to help. That's why we're here. So use us, please. But with that, I will say adieu and goodbye for the final classroom of the series.
Hey, Chris, I've got a question.
Yeah.
So there was a few comments about the blend line here coming out of the pits.
Yes.
In terms of who has the right of way, the car that's at speed heading into the corner, or the guy coming out of the pits, who's now, it's not really clear where the blend line is. Is it at the end of the cones, or where is it? And what's the best strategy there?
Yeah. No, that's a very, very good question. Let me pop over. I don't know why a pit lane is that. That's crazy. That's not pit lane. That's a palm tree. All right. So let me fly us over to pit lane. Whoa. Whoa. There we go. Go over here. Pardon my wonkiness. Let's change the field of view a little wider. Pop up, give us a nice little area. Oh, beautiful Central Florida, am I right? Okay, straight down. Haha. Let's get nice and wide on this. Okay, so here we go. So here's pit lane. And what you're talking about is kind of this situation where pit lane feeds into turn one quite abruptly, frankly. But it is on the outside. So the big thing I'll say here is, first off, from an iRacing penalty perspective, the end of the yellow line is the blend line for iRacing purposes. So there's convenient cone that's right on the end, right here. You barely see it. Which is right at the end of the yellow line. You got to go around that cone if you're exiting pit lane. But once you go around that cone, you're considered on track. There's no blend line after that. There's no need for you to go all the way out here, right of the white line. Cross that cone, finish the yellow line. The yellow line effectively is the blend line on this track. But the question comes in is, out here on pit exit, or on going into turn one, you've got cars screaming through turn one as fast as they possibly can, and they're going to be tracking out right here at this point, right? If you're coming through coming out of pit lane, a similar situation is you're going to end up being out here as well. So by rule of thumb, no, when the two cars are on track, there's no like, this isn't like a stop sign where there's a yield or there's some sort of protocol here. Once you cross that blend line, both cars are considered on track and it's fair game. However, what I will say is the car coming out of pit lane can't see cars very well, cars that are coming through turn one. So there's no reason for a car coming into turn one to be along the blend line because that's way too late. The car will have turned in somewhere over here. So the car on track is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood over here when this car coming out of pit lane is going to be somewhere over here, right? So the only way for there to be a problem is for the pit lane car, which is going slower, to somehow be over in this area and the car coming on track, coming through the corner, runs into the pit lane car on track exit. And so in my opinion, it's up to the car that's on track to see the car coming out of pit lane because they're going to be in front of them for them to cause an issue. If the car on track does not see a car coming out of pit lane, the car on track's going to be well beyond anybody coming out of pit lane. If they don't see a car in front of them, there's no way that the pit lane car is going to be able to catch them by pit exit. It's just physically impossible. The only situation that tends to end up happening is that the pit lane car has already made it to the turn, and the car on track, it refuses to give up their run in spite of a car being on track out, and they just run into the back of them effectively or sideswipe them coming out of the corner because they don't want to lose their run. So this is a very long-winded way of basically saying that the car on track has all of the information and has all the data in front of them and the visuals in front of them of where the other car is. It's the kind of their responsibility at that point to make sure that they are doing what they can to ensure that there's not an incident. The car that is coming out of pit lane, once they've crossed that blend line, they're on track. They can't disappear. They can't vanish. They're not going to be at full speed for sure. But at the same time, there's not a whole lot they can do. They can't come over here and pull off into the runoff and just stop and wait for the car to go through. That's not reasonable. So it's the car on the inside or the car on track needs to modify their line so as they don't run into the car coming out of pit lane.
Okay, thanks.
The car coming out of pit lane also, I mean, in general, you want to take a wide line through. So you kind of want to follow the white line through here to end up on the on-track exit. I mean, you don't want to come out of this corner across the blend line and just like cut across down to the apex point. One, it's incredibly difficult to do that. Like you would have to basically stop the car here and rotate it and then purposely try to drive as tight to the wall as you can. I've never ever coming out of pit lane have ever said, I'm going to try to apex the wall coming out of around this cone. It's just not, I mean, I'm sure it's possible, but if you're trying to go quickly, there's no way that you can do that. You end up basically just creating your own corner around here. And so you end up out here anyway, but it's all the car that's on track already is the one that has all the information, and this should be able to avoid that. But no, great question. Similarly, if we go over to pit in, it's like Watkins Glen pit in. The car pitting in is going to have to take a really, really tight final apex to get in here, and they may not be 100% at track speed. So if you're following somebody tight and you're in pit window-esque and you're noticing they're taking a really tight final apex and they're not quite going as fast, it's probably because they're going to be going down pit lane. If your normal line is this apex point at the grass, it can be very easy, and sometimes you can run into the back of somebody coming down pit lane, exactly like Watkins Glen. So just be aware and make sure that both cars are cognizant. If you're the one pitting, you're looking in your mirror and saying, okay, there's a car 2 feet off my bumper. I don't want to slam on the brakes right here because they're just going to run into me because they're expecting me to accelerate. Similarly, if you're coming through here and a car looks like it's slowing down for pit lane, don't just run into the back of somebody because that's not good either. So just be aware. Cool. But yeah, like I said, final classroom. Enjoy this last treat of a session, in my opinion, with the RSR at Sebring. It'll be a lot of fun. any questions, reach out to me or any of the mods, and we'll be happy to ask. I'm going to stop the recording right now. So if you're listening in TV land, thank you for watching all the series. I've had a pleasure. It's been a pleasure doing these. I really enjoy them. And when the next series starts up, or whatever series we end up doing, I'll pick it back up and do more classrooms. So thanks for watching, you folks, and hope to see you out there soon.